The phrase is quite simple, just 4 words. Ein, im, mi, ledaber. Most literally, you would translate it, ein, there is not, im, mi, with whom to speak, ledaber. In other words, there's no one to talk to. Sounds pretty simple, but in Israel, this phrase carries a cultural and political layer of meaning. Ein im mi ledaber often refers to the status of the peace process when an Israeli says it, and reveals a widespread perception that there is nobody to talk to negotiate with, or speak with on the other side of the aisle, on the other side of that process. In turn, the phrase is often associated with a certain type of rejectionism of the process. If you don't think you have a true partner for dialogue, you probably don't want to engage in that dialogue at all. But in late May, when I returned from my year studying in Jerusalem, this phrase was in my head in a totally different context. It was that of not being able to physically speak Hebrew with people around me anymore. I had ein im mi ledaber. As I may have already shared, I love Hebrew. I love learning language. And this was actually my 2nd year living in Israel. So coming back and having had just come from this immersed experience in the Hebrew language to back in English, you can imagine it might have been a bit frustrating that suddenly, ein im mi ledaber. If you'll indulge a bit of grammar, I want to explain something important about this phrase. That verb, ledaber, to speak, it comes from a whole group of verbs that needs a direct object. It needs something to be done with or to it. In this case, to really speak, ledaber, you need to have someone you're speaking with. You could simply say something. That would be a different verb. But of course, that would not imply that you have somebody speaking with. It would not imply that it needs to be heard by anyone. When you speak, however, it has to have someone on the other end. As with the grammar, so we find in our lives. We too, I think, need to have somebody that we are speaking with. But ein im mi ledaber, that's the problem, right? A lot of times in our lives, we may find or feel that there is nobody to talk to. But it doesn't change our fundamental need to be heard. Sometimes this need to be heard, this need to be speaking with somebody, reveals itself in simple, mundane ways. I recently had the pleasure to spend quite a bit of time on the phone with Capital One. You see, the Israeli gas and internet companies that I had used all of last year decided they'd have some fun charging me over the summer for services I didn't use after I had already returned to the States. Naturally, this was something that I wanted to take care of, yet over the course of several calls with Capital One, I was reminded to expect the challenge of reaching a real, live person. You've all been there. You've all been there. Whether it's the computer asking you to speak the purpose of your call from a list of options that none of which describe what you need to get done, or whether it's holding for 45 minutes with a company to finally set up an account because you don't have an account yet, and the first thing they need is your account number, we have come to accept and expect a great deal of difficulty reaching real people in situations. We have come to expect that our need to be heard will go unfulfilled. We have accepted the fact that ein im mi ledaber. I think we may be at risk of accepting this reality in 2 realms, both the personal and the collective. At the personal level, we have countless ways to communicate with each other, and yet it can feel like it's getting harder and harder to reach somebody. We fool ourselves into thinking that our social media and the speed of our communication is the same as truly speaking with and connecting with another live person. We have a situation in which ein im mi ledaber is becoming the norm, but we don't even always recognize it. We settle for sending a text or an email when we really need to talk something out. We wish our friends happy birthday through the Facebook and think that might suffice as a real means of wishing each other well on an important day. Sometimes, even when we do reach out by voice, we choose to call at a time when we expect the voicemail, because leaving a message seems that much easier than directly connecting and talking with somebody. So we sometimes find that even with such powerful tools to communicate and stay in touch, the use of them, or the lack of the use of them, can make us feel isolated or confused. We can feel distant from one another, even when we are sitting in the same room. Sadly, we know that when we accept this reality at the personal level, these sorts of feelings can lead to very scary and dangerous places. In early August, the news that Robin Williams had died took the headlines for days, if not weeks. Many people wondered how such a funny, talented man with so much to live for could take his own life. I am not a mental health expert by any means, but at some level I imagine that he probably felt like he had ein im mi ledaber, not a single soul on earth he could speak to in that moment. This is an extreme example, one that I hope none of us ever deal with or come anywhere close to personally. But it reminds us that when we feel like we have nobody to speak with, nobody to hear us, life can be very challenging. The same thing seems to hold true for us as a people and society at large. Whether it's issues of politics or war, enemies or perceived enemies in the public arena quickly declare that they have no one to negotiate with. When Israelis say ein im mi ledaber and internalize that idea as reality, they're accepting the status quo. The possibility for any serious dialogue at either the personal or national level is yielded because they've said there's no one else there, even when there might be. So how do we break the cycle of ein im mi ledaber? How do we create a world where we can personally and collectively meet that need to be heard, to engage in true dialogue with one another? I think the first step is taking that phrase out of our vocabulary, out of our mindset. Certainly this will take time. The feeling that we're alone, or there's nobody to talk to, or to turn to in a time of need will not go away instantly. But we can choose to redirect that feeling. I think the beginning of Genesis demonstrates this beautifully. Starting at the very beginning with Adam Harishon, the first person, the Torah tells us that the first thing that is not good, lo tov, is Adam being alone. But God doesn't immediately solve this by creating Eve. God first creates all the beasts and the birds, and when they're not enough, then God forms a partner, Ezer, someone to help him. Suddenly, yesh, there is im mi ledaber, someone to speak with for Adam, for that first need, that first person. It seems, though, that it was a temporary fulfillment, because when Adam and Eve are banished from the garden, the ability for humanity to feel as though there is no one to talk with was reintroduced. Adam and Eve felt a distance from God, from their eternal Father. And 10 generations later, we meet Noah. He was righteous, or righteous enough for his time to merit being saved from the destruction of the flood. He did God's work diligently, yet he had to bear witness to the obliteration of all that he had ever known. God instructs Noah how to build the ark, but Noah never actually responds. He acts, but he never seems to have the same kind of connection, the same kind of im mi, someone with whom to speak with, that Adam and Eve once had in the garden. At the human level also, Noah does not speak to his family throughout the entire ordeal of the flood. This is clearly a man who felt like there was ein im mi ledaber. Things don't get any easier with the Tower of Babel, where human hubris causes God to intentionally confuse our speech. Asher lo yishma'u, so they will not understand, so they will not hear one another's language. It's not until we reach Abraham, Avraham, that we start to get an idea of how we might stop ourselves from feeling like there's nobody to talk to. Ein me. We see this in his relationship with God. At first, Abraham speaks through his actions. He gets up and goes as he is commanded, Lech lecha, and he leaves his father's house. He leaves the land of his birth to journey to the land that God is promising. Yet in that moment, Abraham does not speak directly with God. But later, he'll bargain with God for the lives of righteous men in Sodom and Gomorrah. And what we read just this morning, Abraham introduces to us a new response. A new, fundamentally new idea for humans to respond to God or each other. He says, Hineni. We heard this word beautifully in Chaz's reading. And you may know it as translated as, here I am. Another variation might be, surely I am here. Hine ani. I am certainly with you. In what we read this morning, Hineni is Abraham's way of saying, or starting to say, Yesh, there is immi ledaber. There's someone to talk to. I'm present. It's his way of recognizing God's word to him and acknowledging the presence of the eternal other in his midst. In this case, it is the eternal other, but we can certainly apply that to one another. It's no coincidence that Abraham also uses that word when he stands ready to commit this horrifying act, sacrificing his own son. And the boy cries out to him, Avi, my father, as Chaz read so beautifully. He says, Avi. And what does Abraham say? He says, Hineni b'ni. Surely I am here, my son. Isaac might have been scared, and certainly could have felt like Isaac had ein immi ledaber. He was about to be sacrificed to God. Yet he doesn't succumb to that reality, that there is ein immi. He calls out to his father, and Abraham, too, does not succumb to that reality that there is no one to talk to. He says, surely I am here. Hineni b'ni. We can make the same choice. If we want to break the cycle, to change the reality that there is no one to talk to, ein immi ledaber, we can instead say, Hineni, here I am, surely I am here. We can do this in our personal lives and in our choices about how to communicate with those we love and all those around us. We can say Hineni to them, and if we start to do so, many of them will in turn start to say Hineni in response, when we too are feeling like we have ein immi ledaber. At the social and national levels too, I wonder what our world would look like if more people said Hineni instead of rejecting others as partners for dialogue and progress. I think we might see more serious attempts at lasting peace in Israel. I think we might see more cooperation in Washington or Sacramento and fewer attempts to score cheap political points. I think we might see a world where fewer people go hungry and more children learn how to read. A world where the abundance of our planet can be put towards sustaining its inhabitants now and for generations to come. This year, I pray that we can find the strength to start with Hineni, even when we feel like saying ein immi ledaber. And if we can do this, if we can learn to proudly declare our presence, our willingness to engage openly and sincerely with those around us, we just might start to see a world redeemed. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this too be God's will.